pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
As you take this moment of silence, please remember Miles Bishop, one of our own that we lost. Thank you. Please be seated.
Chair,
Yes, sir.
I make a motion that the school committee go into executive session under the authority of Rhode Island General Laws, Section 42-46-5, Parens A, Parens 1, for the purpose of discussion and/or action pertaining to an individual's job performance or character. 1, approval of the executive session minutes of February 11, 2020, interim superintendent and part-time interim assistant superintendent job performance. And 2, approval of the executive session minutes of February 11, 2020, pre-deprivation hearings and non-renewal of teacher contracts under the authority of Rhode Island General Laws, Sections 42-46-5, Parens A, Parens 2, for the purpose of discussion and/or action pertaining to collective bargaining, approval of executive session minutes of February 11, 2020, NEA ESP contract negotiations update, and under the authority of Rhode Island General Laws, Sections 42-46-5, Parens A, Parens 8, for the purpose of reviewing and/or approving matters which relate to the privacy of students and their records. 1, home instruction request, and 2, approval of executive session minutes of February 11, 2020, home instruction request. Any persons to be discussed have been so notified.
Second.
Thank you. Discussion? Those in favor? Thank you. It's unanimous. We're in executive session. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. It's time. I'm calling us back into session. Sorry, Jane. Number 3.
I recommend that minutes related to the privacy of students and their records, home instruction requests remain sealed.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Those in favor? Thank you. It's unanimous.
You ready?
Mr. Luzon, we're ready for you, sir.
We had 6 votes in executive session. First vote was executive session minutes of February 11th, 2020, pre-deprivation and non-renewal of teacher contracts. We had 10 in favor, 0 opposed, 1 abstention with 0 recusals. In favor, Callahan, Chambers, Day, Giusti, Johnson, Luzon, Lyall, Macruso, McAllister, Stanley. Abstaining, Dimmoff. Second vote was the executive session minutes of February 11th, 2020, interim superintendent and part-time superintendent job performance. We had 10 in favor, 0 opposed, 1 abstention, 0 recusals. In favor, Callahan, Chambers, Day, Giusti, Johnson, Luzon, Lyall, Macruso, McAllister. Oh, I said Stanley. I apologize. I whispered stuff. And the last vote for yea was Stahl, abstaining, Dimmoff. Third vote was the executive session minutes of February 11th, 2020, NEA ESP contract negotiations update. We had 10 in favor, 0 opposed, 0 abstentions, 0 recusals. In favor, Callahan, Chambers, Day, Giusti, Johnson, Luzon, Lyall, Macruso, McAllister, and Stahl. The fourth vote was executive session minutes of February 11th, 2020, home instruction requests. We had 10 in favor, 0 opposed, 1 abstention, 0 recusals. In favor, Callahan, Chambers, Day, Giusti, Johnson, Luzon, Lyall, Macruso, McAllister, and Stahl. Fifth vote was a home instruction request. We had 11 in favor, 0 opposed, 0 abstentions, 0 recusals. In favor, Callahan, Chambers, Day, Dimmoff, Giusti, Johnson, Luzon, Lyall, Macruso, McAllister. And the fourth vote was to come out and visit you folks.
6.
sixth vote.
Yep.
And it was 11 in favor, 0 opposed, 0 abstentions, 0 recusals. In favor, Callahan, Chambers, Day, Dimhoff, Juicy, Johnson, Luzon, Lyall, Macruso, McAllister, and Stahl.
Thank you, Craig. Recognition.
Please join me in congratulating the following. Grade 8 student Emily Myers, selected as Rhode Island's top middle-level youth volunteer in the 2020 Prudential Spirit of Community Awards. She is also qualified for the President's Volunteer Service Award. Charlestown School Teacher Assistant Christine Miguel, selected as January Employee of the Month. High school senior Dalton Stone. He is the second-place winner in the 2020 State Shakespeare Competition. Special thank you also to high school English teacher Sandra Lobb.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
If I may, I'd like to suggest that we invite this young lady to one of our school committee meetings to be recognized at the school committee level, because, you know, she is just one of our students here, and I think it's important to let her know that we really appreciate her efforts.
Thank you, Paul. This brings up public forum. If there's anybody here who would like to discuss anything or share with us something that is not on the agenda. Going once. All right, thanks. On to policy.
Okay, this evening you have in front of you the School Improvement Teams policy. This is a first reading. It's a brand-new policy, and I recommend approval of the first reading of this policy, which has been reviewed by legal counsel. I'd like to let you know, too, the school administrative team worked on this together, and the policy is scheduled for adoption on March 10th, 2020.
So moved.
Thank you. Motion is second to approve the first reading of this policy. Discussion. Yes, sir.
I think it's a well-written policy. One thing that I'd like to suggest that the school committee receive minutes. I see nowhere in this policy where it requires them to send minutes at the next meeting after the closest meeting after their meeting. Am I making sense there?
Yes.
Because I think it's important that we understand fully what these individual school improvement teams are trying to accomplish with the whole new system, as far as us on the school committee have been used to. So that would be my suggestion to add to that.
Okay, so I had Donna, Craig, Linda.
I have several questions, and one of them was, are there minutes taken, and do we get to see the minutes? And also, my question was, the decision-making process, there are SIT teams in place already, is that correct? Okay. Do they have something that we could base as at least a baseline for how the decisions are made? Oh,
I think each school has their own process for that, in
Okay.
terms of how they vote and how they come to decisions. So there's not one specific document. I think the point is we really want to encourage the site-based management, so we want the administrator and the team to work together to come up with what that might be. So it might be, do they agree by consensus? Is it a majority vote? You know, what's going to be their process?
see, I was just thinking that we could offer at least a baseline of how these decisions, a baseline for this, and then they could adopt whatever else they would want. But to just let it be loose that each school can have a different procedure for coming to make decisions seems loose to me. That, and also, and I know we don't have say, we've had to move into the putting it off to each individual building, and the SIT teams have the decision-making process. I know all of that.
change, but the SIT team's going to be involved in the hiring of new staff and disciplinary actions for new staff. That's another question I have. It's not, I don't think it's addressed in here.
Please.
So in our personnel management policy, we did update that, and in that policy now, the school improvement team works in consultation with the principal to identify who's going to be on the interview team. So we didn't make it just that the school improvement team was the interview team for many reasons, one being that in the summer they may not all be available, but also because different roles in the school might require different people to be part of that team. So that's how they're involved in the hiring process. In terms of the termination process, that still comes before the school committee. So that has not changed, yes.
Okay, thank you. That's all
Thank you.
I'd like to just continue on what Donna was saying. There's a couple of things I'm still concerned about.
And one is the paragraph that says membership. It says last sentence, no single group may collectively constitute over 50% of the SIT team. Okay? So you establish a team per building. You define who you want on the team. Does this apply to their meetings also? Because I'm concerned going forward, this may become an issue. So should there be a quorum? Should we at least have the wording in there saying there should be a quorum at every meeting? Because I can see eventually it becoming the SIT team becoming the principal and the teachers. I'm just concerned about that. And my other concern is I have total faith and trust in our principals, but I think just giving the principal that much power, I don't think teachers, and please don't be offended by this, I think teachers are gonna not want to buck the principal, so they're gonna just go along with what the principal wants. Is there any way we can kind of look at that? Just food for thought. That one's food for
Getting more
thought.
information.
Yeah.
Could you expand on that a little bit in terms of when you say look at that?
I'm just concerned with it. I'm just telling you I'm concerned.
Okay.
I'm not saying it's gonna happen instantly, I'm not saying it's gonna happen in a year, but I'm thinking somewhere down the line, human nature, that's possibly could be addressed. But as far as the first issue I brought up, I'm really concerned with that,
The quorum.
the quorum issue.
Understood.
That's a good point.
Thanks, Chair, for the opportunity, but my issues and questions have been addressed. Okay, I'm sorry, I thank the Chair for the opportunity to speak, but my issues and questions were addressed. With the conversation. Thank you.
Lisa.
So I wanted to start with a compliment, but I'm going to start instead with agreeing with Craig on the quorum, so just add me to the list of people who feel that our representative for each of those groups needs to be present for the meeting to be functional. So I think this is really well constructed. I think that this is a great first read, and a lot of the work has been done for us. I particularly appreciate under membership the clear indication that you are going to seek out a community of citizens who are representative of the ethnic, racial, and economic community served by that school. So I'm really impressed and proud of the work you did to include that. In doing so, be mindful and thoughtful that in order to recruit those individuals, you need to advertise to target areas of the community where those groups will be represented. So to simply only advertise to the PTO and the Westerly Sun, right, you may be seeking a diverse group, but if you don't actually capture and interact at the points of communication where those groups would otherwise be communicating, it's going to be for naught. So just be really intentional about how you recruit for those groups. I would also ask that you move the line where it says no single group may collectively constitute over 50% of the SIT team. I know what you mean, but it's following the sentence that says you're seeking ethnic, racial, and economic communities served by the school. So in terms of the story, it sounds like what you're referring to, just kind of like old school grammar, is you're referring to the group preceding that sentence, which makes it sound like you're saying no more than 50% of the team can be of any one racial group, economic group, or ethnic group, which is not what you mean. So I would just put that, what I think you're intending to say is of teachers, educational support professionals, and students, right? No more than 50% of that group will be represented, correct?
So it's of any group, meaning teachers, education support professionals, students, parents, and other business and community citizens.
Correct.
But you're correct, not
Right,
correct.
you don't mean can't
Yes.
have more than 50% Native American.
Right.
Because it could very well be the case that would, okay. So let's just move that so I can vote for this next time around. And then my other consideration for the committee is under the membership process, the school committee shall review the membership composition and can direct the principal to reopen the application process and appoint additional members to achieve proper representation. That's fine, but I think that because this is one of the few areas where the school committee can still remain involved in the development of our community, I might suggest that a school committee member actually be part of the team so that it doesn't actually even have to get to the point where a team comes forward for us to approve and we have to send it back after they've done all of that work. If somebody is there representing the school committee's interests, then it can get resolved, or any concerns can be resolved there before it comes to school committee. I feel like it may put us in an unnecessarily tenuous position to look at a committee and say, nope, you're missing this, go back to the drawing board when the school is ready and wanting to get to work. So I just ask you to think about that a little bit.
Bill?
I don't know, looking at this again, kind of a little confused here in the membership application. We do by March 31st and selection on April 30th. Is this for the following school year, or is this, or would their term be 2 months and then a year? I mean, to me, and then when it gets in there, it says, well, 1 year term and 2 year terms. Well, in the elementary school level and these other buildings over here too, if a parent wants to be on this team and their child is a fourth grader, they're gonna lose interest in being on an elementary school team the second year, and then vice versa at the high school or the middle school level if their child is at the top of the class. So I'm not too sure that this is not going to create a lot more turnover than we're envisioning. If we're appointing people for 2 year terms and their child is, and like I said, in elementary school, a fourth grader, we're gonna get 1 year out of them, but then again, where are we going forward?
Okay.
So the thinking is they would start May 1st, and the reason for that is because of the continuity, so that when you think of this team meeting, they'd start right after the budget got approved, so they'd really be starting like a fresh year in terms of thinking over the summer and then hiring that they have to do in the summer. So that was the thought. I mean, certainly we can go back to the team and we could do it for September 1st. But I think the thinking was just that you'd start with a team that would kind of work with you over the summer. We get RICAS and state testing data and other types of data in September, and then they're working on their improvement plan for the fall. So instead of just kind of starting right away in September, but, you know, thinking of, again, that hiring for that following school year. But we could take a look at that.
I'll give you that, but there's going to be no continuity if you got a 2 year term.
Yeah.
Your child is at the top of the grade level that this person is interested in participating.
Craig?
Just looking at the motion itself,
Historically, we've always had a first reading and a second reading, then we adopt. But here you're saying we're going to have a first reading tonight, and then we're going to adopt.
It's only been a first reading and adoption. So
And we've never had a second reading before.
unless you request another reading.
Could I
If
just
it
ask-
comes back the next time and you have changes on it, then it would have to come back again for adoption because you've added more changes to it.
So can I just ask John a quick question, please?
Okay.
So John,
Yes.
how quick does the state want us to enact this?
The state took on so much with this education reform that frankly, you know, unless you're in the city of Providence, the state really isn't paying much attention to anything. I think some compliments are due here in that you are ahead of the curve, as far as I know, in terms of almost every district in the state in terms of tackling this problem. That being said, you're going to have something in place because this summer, when you're in a position to hire people, the power has been taken away from the superintendent. The power, or most of the power, has been taken away from the superintendent. All of the power has been taken away to the school, from the school committees, and they've been given to school improvement teams. And you need to have some guidelines in place so that, you know, it does not become an unfair or lopsided affair. I mean, I'll follow up on something Lisa said. People tend to hire people who look like themselves. And if we don't insist on having some diversity in terms of the types of people who are on a committee, we're going to get people who look like themselves. I think this whole school improvement team is ripe for a lot of abuse. And I think that what you're trying to do here is get ahead of the curve. I want to make it clear that I think the suggestions about making sure there's a quorum is a very important idea. I think the idea of having minutes is a very important idea. So if you were to want to work on this again at the March meeting and then finally approve it at the second March meeting, God bless you, that's your prerogative as the school committee members. That's not my role to tell you what to do. On the other hand, I wouldn't want to be here, you know, in May and have school improvement teams running around doing all sorts of things and saying, we have all the power under state law and you have not in any way channeled it.
So Chair, I'd like to amend the motion to have a second reading and then a final reading. So, I don't know, I can't do that.
I think the way, so I think approval of the first reading is still fair, and that motion's on the table. I don't think that we have to adopt it. I think what we could do is at the end of the meeting, just establish that for next meeting, we want the second reading on the agenda.
But what is written is, the policy is scheduled for adoption on March 10th.
Fair enough. John? did you have a comment?
I want to say that's exactly the way to do it, the way that you described it, is simply, you know, is there a consensus that you'd like to see? Raise some good suggestions, some things that I didn't think of. My suggestion is that you put this on the agenda for the next meeting. I know that the superintendent has been taking notes. I know Donna's been taking notes. And circulate another draft at the next meeting. And take, you know, if you're ready to vote, fine. But if it's like, nope, we need to keep working on it, this is an important one, and it's one that you want to get right.
Agreed. David?
I just wanted to agree with Lisa's sentiment and add some support to that for having a board, a school committee representative there in the makeup of the committee, if not as a voting or participating member of the committee, at least as a liaison or a connecting point that's invited, that's involved in their communication, that's invited to meetings, that's present. Whether or not that's a voting part of their committee, just to have that there, I think it will make it more cooperative right from the beginning. And
I agree with that. I think it's a fantastic idea. I do still think it's important that the school committee retain, you know, authority to review that composition and have some control over it. So both those are great ideas. So John, a question, I'm sorry, before I get to the two hands in the audience. If we, since the recommendation is to approve the first reading of this policy, which has been reviewed by legal counsel, end of that sentence. The next sentence, the policy is scheduled for adoption on March 10th. I don't see that as necessarily a part of the motion.
I agree.
So we can go ahead and just leave the motion as it stands. Thank you. Sheila, I think you were first.
Sheila Grover from Richmond. I wanted to agree with Mr. Luzon. I think the idea that there be some sort of a quorum and also a way, whether it's like secret ballot or something, once this is set up, it is very difficult to imagine that in every case when a principal has people that are working for them participating in votes, it'd be very, very hard to expect those people to go against whatever that principal has in mind, at least in some cases. There has to be a way to address that. I don't know if, secret ballots is the way to go, but that's the first thing that comes to mind. I don't know if that's allowed or what the rules are. That's one thought. The other question I had was, as far as the membership process, members representing teachers, education supports, professionals, students, and parents shall be selected by their peer groups. So parents, what does that mean? So other parents in the community would put forth names, or I'm confused as to how exactly that works.
So that is the legislation, actually. That's where that's taken from. But what that means is that my experience with that when I was in Massachusetts and we did this, honestly, was that you would take nominations, people would apply, so you'd have parents that would apply, and then you would do an election with the parents. And we usually would do that at an open house, or depending on the time of year, what kind of meetings were going on. It could also be done now. It's very easy to do it, electronically through a Google form.
So you
But it would be the parents of the students in the school.
Right, so you would say, I'm interested as a parent, and then there'd be some, it would go out to the other parents. That makes sense to me. I just wasn't sure how that would work.
Sure.
And I think that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Barbara.
Barbara Capalvo, Hopkinton. I was listening to Bill Day, and I'd like to also encourage you to think of a way to have the meetings with consistency, because you have 7 schools and 3 towns. So it'd be very nice if they all either did majority rule or vote by paper. I don't really care, but something that's consistent between the groups, so that a parent who wants to run for 2 years in Charleston Elementary may also want to run with her other child in high school, and they have consistent rules to follow, so they aren't tripping over their own feet. The other thing that might be actually good about the 2-year, even if you have a 4th grader, a child at the top of their age group, is if that parent agrees in the 4th grade to stay, because they should agree, that they're bringing consistency again. They're bringing the knowledge of how the group works and what the group thought. So having them stay, even if they don't have a child in the school, might be of value. And then after the 2 years, they might want to move on to another school. But the 2 years may be of value because you bring some kind of knowledge that will move forward. But also, you really need consistency. There's too many schools and 3 towns to work between. And that's difficult all by itself. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Bill.
One thing I was just noticing here with the reports, all the PTO meetings are 5:30, 6 o'clock, but I do notice like the Richmond School Improvement Team meeting is at 3:45 to 4:30. This is going to be very difficult if these meetings are going to be that time of day for parents to be involved. So this is another thing that I think needs to be addressed, that these meetings not be right after school. And basically, that's what that one is at Richmond, very shortly after school. So I'm sure, I don't know about the other improvement teams, as they stand now when they meet, but PTO meetings are in the evenings, so it's convenient for parents, but this one may not be if they're going to hold it at that time of day.
Understood. This gets back to that decision process and, you know, having uniform consistency between the various SIT groups. Dave, do you have a comment?
So several of the questions that we've just been asking fall into this duties of the school improvement teams. That first bullet point about they will develop and implement a meeting protocol in their decision-making process, whether we're talking about how they vote or when they hold meetings and that sort of thing. Is that bullet point part of the way the legislation reads and we're required to leave it that way? Or could we as a group set some standards like meeting times or methods of voting or Robert's rules? As you know, could we set some standards and put them into the policy so that there is consistency in how the different SITs meet?
Yes, we can. That is not from the legislation. That's something that we added. So we can add more to it. We can make it more, more consistent. We can give more of a baseline, like it was mentioned. We can specifically address the time. I mean, I would think that if the time is mutually agreeable to everybody on the team, then whether it's 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, it would be whatever works for the people on the team. But we could put some more language in there to tighten it up, for sure.
Excellent.
If I could just add one more comment on the minutes. The only thing I envision, though, is you've got, how many schools, and they're going to have meetings probably every other month. That's a lot of minutes coming here. I wonder, one policy I read that started to get drafted in Barrington, actually, they had that they get posted on the school's website. And the other pieces we'll have to just remember to think about, they'll have to vote on them. So just like you vote on your minutes, it can't be that they have the meeting and then the minutes just get published or distributed. They'd have to wait till the next meeting where they could vote on them. I would think that would be the right protocol, then they'd get posted. So a more timely way to do it, because then I'm thinking then when do we have a school committee meeting, might be to then require that they post them on their school's website. So just a thought.
Okay.
I don't want to belabor this, but, as a school committee person, I'm here to represent the entire district. And if I don't know what's going on at these schools, because this is a new territory, and, I think that, we have some people that are going to follow the rules and directions and policy, but I also feel that as if someone comes up to me complaining about something going on at the high school, and I don't even know what the heck they're talking about, because the school improvement team has decided to do something, I can't give them any kind of intelligent answer. And I don't think this is what our people voted us to do, to represent the district. So I think that to me, it's very important to know what's going on in these school buildings. I don't know how the rest of the committee feels, but I just don't feel comfortable not knowing what's going on until the proverbial thing goes sideways.
Yeah, I think I'm getting a sense from the committee that meeting minutes are going to be important, and we're going to have to understand the oversight of these teams going forward before we approve a policy. Additional discussion on this topic. Looks like we have a lot of action items with respect to the second reading, which we'll be requesting for March 10th. All right. Okay. No further discussion. Then with respect to the motion and the second for approval of the first reading of this policy, those in favor? Thank you. Opposed? You're right. Thank you.
Okay, next we have the school activity funds. This item is on the agenda at the request of Mr. Day.
Well, I've got a communication from John, and I respect John immensely. I just think that maybe some more research done as to how we can access some of these funds that have been raised for the benefit of the students. This has been an issue with me forever. I think Mr. Lazan can attest to this. I mean, when you look at some of these accounts over here, especially in the middle school there, you know, we have the gold team at the middle school started the year with $6,000 in their account. So if my child is on the gold team, I'm sure my child is going to get a different quality experience in that middle school than someone who's on one of the other teams that, in some cases, there's less than $100 in the account. So I think that we need to look at how this thing is administered. I used to have some paperwork on that, but that was quite a while ago. But I would like to feel that everybody in the school district gets an equal treatment. And I see some of this, especially around the middle school with their gold teams and purple teams and other teams there, that there's got to be some inequities here. That one team is getting started the year with $6,000, and
Yeah.
I don't know. Another team here started at $24.71. You know, where's the equity here? So, if we can't do anything about determining whether any of this money was raised for fundraising, then maybe we need to look at the SAF account and find out how we can make this more equitable in the middle school, which seems to be the one that jumps out at me to have all these teams with various amounts of money in their accounts.
Okay. I had Craig and then Lisa.
Couple. Mrs. Rogers, approximately how many SAF accounts do we have?
They're all listed right on the sheet.
So just give me a number. A lot.
A lot.
A lot.
Okay.
But many,
Are-
much less than we used to have.
Are any abandoned?
No, we've cleaned up all the abandoned accounts.
Yeah, there goes my question. Thank you.
Mr. Day, thank you so much for bringing this up. This is my 5th year on the committee, and I need an SAF 101. Can you tell us what the mission of these accounts are? What does it mean that there's $55,000 in reserves? I don't even really understand what I'm looking at, how this gets expended. I could really just use an overview of what this is.
Please.
So SAF is funds raised by students for the use of students. They have to have a reason to raise the funds. So they might be, I know 8th grade used to raise money for the 8th grade field trip. And that money had to be used for the 8th grade field trip. If they're raising the money, then those funds have to be used for the students. So the district couldn't take that money that they raised for a specific reason and spend it on something else.
Does that money need to be spent on the students who raised the money? Like, how is all this money here?
Well, exactly, that is a question that I could go back and ask the middle school. At one point, they had discussed that if the money was raised by the 5th graders and it wasn't spent by the kids who raised it, then it went to the 6th grade as they moved up.
Okay.
I'm not sure, because I haven't had a lot of interaction with them, if that is the practice anymore, or if it actually stays with the 5th grade. I know in the high school, what's raised by the 9th graders follows them to 10th grade, follows them to 11th, follows them to seniors. And then on the second page, wait a minute, maybe it's the third page. No, the second page, yeah, the class reserves. Those are monies that are left over from our senior classes. And they are used occasionally when the class has a reunion. They'll come back to us and say, you know, we know that we have class of 2009, $8,900, and we want to use that money towards our reunion. But the nice thing about SAF is it follows the same purchasing policy as everything else in the district. It's in our Keystone system, so purchase orders, requisitions are done, purchase orders are signed and reviewed. It follows the exact same purchasing policy.
Thank you. Jane, you were going to add something?
No, I was going to talk about that reserves, but Susan answered that.
Great.
So that's the only time with the reserves? I mean, that's a big chunk of money for the class of 2009, which my youngest son was a part of, by the way.
That's not the class of 2009, though. That's the class of, I believe, 2015 and going back to when the district started. That's just right? Isn't that just one big pool of money?
The $55,000 is the pool of money from
Correct.
classes of 1990 up to class of 2015. There are some years missing because they didn't have any money.
Well, I assume that, but
Okay.
I'm assuming class of 2009 is $8,958.
Yes.
So the only time they can, I mean, do we have a policy on that for former classes? On how they had-
Honestly, I do not know.
Oh,
I know that we have signers for each class, but who was the treasurer of the class when they graduated? Are they still even around 10, 20 years later? But we, again, due to purchasing policy, we had one of the classes last summer having a reunion, contacted us. It wasn't the same individuals that were involved back when they graduated from high school, but we did have all the documentation from them that they had the permission. We didn't write any checks out to those people. We wrote them directly to the restaurant, the DJ, for that reunion.
okay. Thank you.
Okay, so I have a question. So these SAF accounts, somebody wants to create an account, they come to who for permission to create the account? They want to raise money for something. How do you establish an SAF account?
Fundraisers are all approved by the superintendent.
Okay, so the superintendent decides to allow for senior parking, a SAF account for senior parking. And then that account then gets funded by individuals who participate in it. Who controls disbursement?
The senior parking funds are supposed to be used to pay for the stickers that the kids have, to help pay for any cleanup or upkeep.
Yeah, I guess I was more in general for any individual SAF account, who's responsible for disbursement? Of
They're
those
advisors.
funds? So advisors, are those advisors established on the account?
No, we're the people on the accounts.
Okay, so we're the
Yes.
people on the account, okay. Okay, so in terms of oversight of those accounts and compliance, what type of oversight, compliance, audit do we have that we're?
Again, they go through the same purchasing policy that we
Okay.
do. So, like Drama looks like they have quite a bit of money, but this is the time of year where they're getting involved with the drama. She's buying the rights to have a play. So it looks like there's a lot of money, but a lot of money comes in and a lot of money goes right back out.
Okay.
This report has what they started with this year, what's come in, what's gone out, and what's encumbered, and the balance
Okay,
as of the end of January.
okay. I saw two hands, Murat and Bill. Murat?
I think I wanted to ask a question pretty much following the same discussion. Thank you. Patterns that Craig was asking. Do we have a formal procedure or a policy that says this is how these accounts are being established, this is how they're being handled, this is how they're being terminated if there's a termination? Because I feel like there is a lot of money floating around in you know, that different group of people may at some point start asking questions about, and I don't know if we just say, this is how we do things, is that good enough of an answer?
They're raised for a specific reason.
No, I'm
Right.
I'm not disputing that. I have nothing against the reasons and whatnot. I'm just saying, it's money, right? It's financial value of some sort to some group of people, and we end up being basically handling this money. I just want to see if there is, if it's better for the district to have a formal procedure saying if somebody such and such class wants to establish a specific SAF account, this is the policy you follow. That's it. That's all I'm asking.
We do have a an SAF policy.
Okay.
School committee policy. It's under school administration.
Okay.
Could I speak to one thing? Please. There is, just in, Mr. Day, you mentioned about the money. One of the things in the policy is actually about the SAF interest account. So that right now is at $14,574.22. And it does say an account such as that shall fall under the jurisdiction of the superintendent of schools and may be dispersed with the superintendent's approval. So there is a few funds where they're not designated, where we can do something with them.
Okay, that's fine. I don't, last time I knew, which goes back 5, 6 years ago, maybe, probably certainly before you come on, because this was a battle I had before, was that they had a group of students representing the middle school, high school stuff, and they also, this is at one time now, it could be changed by then, but this was a group of students that met on a regular basis, dispersed some of these funds that weren't specifically tied to accounts. And that, I might be
I
old.
believe you, I just
might be
haven't
old,
heard of
but
that.
I remember that. The other issue that I think is a small issue, but, you know, this account is administered, if you want to use that terminology, or cared for by the school department's treasurer.
No.
No. Who administers it?
Well, it's treated like every other
Who
account in the
is the
district,
person
but
that writes-
the Assistant Director of Administration and Finance
Oh, okay.
oversees.
Okay, so it isn't a school employee, I stand
Right.
corrected, it's
Yeah.
a school employee, so we're paying somebody to administer an account that we have no
It's included in her salary.
control or no knowledge of what's going on, is my issue.
The payments do come through on your payment reviews.
Donna.
I'm confused too. I believe this was brought up by you, Bill, because we were questioning whether or not some things like field trips and things like that, or other expenses that we have that we need to eliminate out of our budget, could be paid for by this money, these accounts. And from John's counsel, we find out it has to go specifically, if I'm correct, John, it has to go specifically for the intention of what it was raised for. Is that a correct interpretation? Okay, so, but I also see that principals have accounts also, large accounts, which is fine, but could they use those accounts for things like funding a field trip for the 4th grade? Is it possible to use the principal accounts for those purposes?
The SAF rules, we've done a lot of tightening up on SAF rules. Principals never should have had funds under SAF because that money is not raised by kids, so it should never have been in the principal's account. Some of the money that had gone into principal accounts in the past were the company that takes student photographs will normally send a check to the principal. Stop and Shop, parents who buy things at Stop and Shop, they then send a check to the principal. And it had always been deposited into the principal's fund, SAF. We've stopped that practice because it shouldn't have been. So now it is deposited into the donation fund. And the principal has to get in writing from that donor what those funds are supposed to be used for. So many of them say, use it at your discretion.
Okay.
So those are uncommitted funds. They can use them for whatever they want. They could use them for field trips. I know that principals have used them to help students who can't afford to go on a field trip, go on a field trip. But as long as the donor has given us something in writing that says they can use it for whatever they want, it goes into the undesignated donor account. So what we've asked, rather than transferring all these funds, the principals are spending this money down. So hopefully by next year, there will be no money left in SAF principals' accounts. They'll all be in the donation funds.
Okay, thank you. That was a great explanation, but can I follow up with something? So with the intention of trying to reduce some of the items out of our budget, and what John is advising us, we could not use the money from the athletic concession stand to pay for things like equipment or helmets or anything like that. Am I correct on that?
Well, we actually do.
We do
We
do
do.
that?
There are two different athletic types of funds. There's the enterprise fund, so when the gate receipts that they charge people, those go into an enterprise fund, similar to what happens when we sell food over at the Career and Technical Center. Those funds are used to, at the Career and Tech, offset additional foods purchased for culinary in athletics, offset the cost of some of their uniforms, balls. They're used for multiple different things, so they do supplement the budget.
Even though they weren't, when I buy a hot dog at a baseball game, I'm not saying, oh,
That's the
please-
boosters.
Huh?
That's the boosters.
Oh, that's the boosters, okay. Excuse my
Yep.
ignorance on that.
But when you pay to get into the game, that
Okay.
money goes into what's called an enterprise fund.
Enterprise fund, and that's at the discretion of the director of athletics?
Yes, but again, it has to go through the whole process. So there's a requisition done, a purchase order done, and every item on purchase orders, both myself and Jane review. So if we see something on that, I will question it, then Jane will question it, and either we will allow it or we won't allow it.
Okay, so just from my own experience in Fairfax County, when I was working in Virginia, we used to have what we called a Coke fund. And that's what that was. Anything extra money, Coke fund meaning the money that we made from the Coke machine or from any kind of bake sales or whatever would go into that fund. And we could ask for, we could requisition that money for good causes. And that doesn't exist here. It has to be very specifically designated for that purpose.
For the most part, yes.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Craig?
So, you implied that any interest gained on all of this is dispersed at the discretion of the superintendent?
That's what the policy, our policy says.
So the class of 2009, who evidently, from 2006 to 2009, did their due diligence and raised evidently well over $8,958, never going to see that grow. Class of 2007, oh, that's right, they're not here, so evidently they didn't do their due diligence, but the point is, they're not going to see, these groups aren't going to see their money grow either.
Not if it goes into the interest account and we can use that money for other things.
It's not an investment.
Right.
So if there's a fund, and I think we're all kind of coming to the same conclusion. So if a principal that's no longer the SAF fund, so now it goes into a donation fund, does he have the discretion to use that? And does it have to be used within a certain time frame? And then if it's not used, where does it go from there?
So there's two types of donations.
Yeah.
There's committed donations. So I, as a parent, want to donate for my child to go to the Seaport Aquarium on their field trip.
Yeah.
That's a committed fund. That money is used before the operating budget funds money are used. So the committed funds zero out at the end of the year because parents or community are giving that money for a specific reason. Uncommitted funds, say from the Stop and Shop or the photographers, We would like those funds used in that year, because tracking them year to year gets extremely difficult. We've impressed upon the staff, the principals, to utilize that money within that year. But if they don't, it rolls, and it stays in that same donation fund.
Barbara?
Barbara Hopkinton. I'm not going to get into the weeds on the SAF, but I would like to suggest, because it sounds like one of the major issues is you need to have in your policy a finish date where you tell all the classes that at the end of 5 years after they graduate, whatever money is left over will be donated to 1, 2, or 3 charities that you have chosen as seniors, and you give them 3 choices in case one of them dies, and you give them these choices, you give them let them vote, so they get 3 charities, and at the end of 5 years or 2 years, whatever is left over in their monies gets donated, so that the school, under no circumstance, continues to hold people's money for 20 or 30 years. This is ridiculous. Whatever they've raised, it's their money. They can choose where it goes, and at the end of 2 years after they graduate, it goes there. And then it's closed, and those accounts are dead from 2009 or 1886. Because I think you don't have a completion date, which is why you're having all of this massive amounts of interest and things adding up, and it just needs to die a respectable death.
Money out and put it in your own account. That's what they should be doing.
That's what they should be doing.
Yeah.
Mr. Stahl?
Just a really quick question. Are all of the SAF accounts accruing interest?
They're all in bank.
One big one.
They're all in one checking account.
They're just in a checking account.
That does accrue interest. But again, the majority of that money comes in and out. So putting it
Gotta be
into
able
a
to get to it fast.
I honestly think there is one CD with SAF funds in it, but the majority of that money rolls.
Okay.
It comes in and it goes right back out.
Chair?
Sorry, who had a question?
That was Marat. Did you have any? Oh, I apologize.
Okay. Any further discussion on SAF funds?
I'd just like to thank Mr. Day for bringing this issue up.
So what's the result?
Oh, we'll find out at the end of the meeting.
Oh, okay.
Donna?
And I was going to see if we could possibly, because it would be for next meeting, is to look at the policy again. Can we look at that policy and at a future time?
Yeah.
And make some amendments?
We'll bring that up in, at the end. We'll ask for,
Yeah, I will, but I'm just wondering with John here, is there a legal reason? It has to be run by him legally, right? If we change the policy like what Barbara was suggesting and disperse the money that is left over after a certain period of time, is that state regulated? Is that legally regulated?
No, there is no regulations at all.
Okay.
There are high schools in the state that at the end of the senior year, they write a check out to the class treasurer, and the class treasurer finds a place to put it, and that's the way it happens.
Okay.
I mean, I think there is one advantage to the system that you have now, notwithstanding the headaches that it creates, is that the interest that is generated does come back to the school department and provides some unrestricted money that allows the superintendent to, you know, yeah, we can pay for those 4th graders who can't afford to go to Slater Mill. We have some money to do that. And if the class of 2009 is comfortable leaving it and the interest accrues that way, God bless them. If the class of 2009 doesn't like it, great, spend it on your next reunion and say goodbye, you know, which maybe perhaps the class of 2007 did. I don't, you know, I don't know specifically, but there are pros and cons. Let me say this though, First of all, I had conversations with regard to another school district about these same issues earlier today. The controls that you have in place are much tighter than I see elsewhere. With regard to the issue of equity, I think the appropriate place for that is to have the administration, to have the superintendent or the assistant superintendent sit down with the building principal and ask the building principals what's going on. I understand where the questions are coming from. When I was on the school committee in Pawtucket, the poorest of the poor schools in Pawtucket had $30,000 in the bank. And nobody on the school committee understood that, and so forth. You know, but I think that that's something for the administration. And maybe there's a wonderful reason. They've been having car washes every week and, you know, and so forth. But I think that that's something for the administration to explore. If you've got concerns at the middle school, have the superintendent or the assistant superintendent or the finance director sit down with the principal of the middle school and say, what's, you know, school committee's asking questions. I have the same questions. What's going on here?
So if I, thank you, John, if I suggested at the end of the meeting for a future meeting, a review, it doesn't have to be next meeting, we can get through the budget, but we can review this again and it would be run by you anyway, so.
Yeah, the superintendent runs all policies through me, but there's no state guidance on this, and so forth.
And I think it's a good idea to have the principals, because they probably have some very good ideas of how to.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Murat.
Hopefully one last thing on this particular topic. So with the school improvement teams in the future coming up and doing our jobs, will they have access or authority to manage these funds too?
That is not included in the state legislation, and they would only have access if you. They would only have access. I think that might be the problem. They would only have access if you chose to give them access to it. Right now, the system you have is that the principal has access, and the principal exercises control, subject to the fact that they have to use purchase orders. You just can't. You know, I've had schools where the principal has a checkbook in his desk drawer. And nobody accounts, nobody audits, nobody does anything. You have a lot of controls already in space. It's subject, it's part of your district audit.
Yes, it is.
That's not true in other places across the board. You know, so I want to make it really clear, you have a lot of controls already in place. That being said, I respect the fact that you have questions of, there seems to be inequity. What's the reason? Maybe there's a good one, maybe there's not. I don't know.
Any further discussion on this topic? Nope, thank you. We are going to move on to letter B. All right, Superintendent Search Committee. John.
Okay. I'm gonna try to stay away from it. At the last meeting, you all asked me to look into some things, and I did. I also want to recognize that Sue was some tremendous help with me in that we did a lot of this on very short notice because of my schedule the last 2 weeks, and I apologize for that. In terms of talking with people. As we indicated at the last meeting, we spoke again, we spoke with NESDEC. For Sue, it was the second time. For me, it was the first time. And I believe that you have been distributed to you the information that Sue and I received from NESDEC. What NESDEC provided us is pretty much what we talked about at our last school committee meeting. In addition to that, though, we did some cross-checking, or Sue did. Sue, for example, talked to the business, her counterpart, the business administrator in Smithfield. Smithfield used NESDEC 3 or 4 years ago in their superintendent search for their current superintendent. And I'll defer to Sue in a minute to explain what she found out in terms of the reference checking. In addition to that, I believe that if you have more opportunities, it's always good to shop around. I was contacted, and from what I understand afterwards, some of you were contacted by, and let me say this about NESDEC, the person who runs NESDEC is a retired superintendent. This is a gig that retired superintendents do. We were also contacted by JE Consulting, which is a small operation operated by a gentleman named Joseph Arati, and he is also in this business. He seems to have more recent experience here in Rhode Island, in that we all get in our cars and go up to East Greenwich. They are announcing their new superintendent tonight in East Greenwich, and he just finished. They're finishing tonight their search by, ladies and gentlemen, meet Mr. or Miss So-and-so. I have no idea who it is. They've done a great job in terms of confidentiality with regard to that search. He also has done recent searches in Tiverton, North Providence, and Lincoln, as when I say recent, within the last 2 years. Sue and I spoke with Mr. Arati as well. We asked both NESDEC and Mr. Arati for pricing, which has been provided to you. Sue spoke to the finance director in East Greenwich, who played a role on he was a member of the East Greenwich Search Committee. Again, I'll defer to Sue to report on her reference checking. One thing I can say about JE Consulting, East Greenwich had a lot of luxury of time. Their superintendent told them back in September that he was leaving December 31st, and they agreed to have an interim for December 31st till June. So whereas we, very sadly got hit with doing this at the beginning of the year, they knew back in September. So they have been doing this, they started their process back then. There were a lot of, frankly, very common things that both NESDEC and JE Consulting, do as services. The first thing that both of them would want to do, whichever one you will retain, they want to sit down and talk with the school committee. They want to get your input in terms of what are you looking for in terms of how is this going to work. We told them about the fact that you have 3 towns, and 3 towns have different concerns and so forth, and we're very conscious and respectful of our 3 different towns. We talked about the fact that this was not, for example, Providence has a superintendent who's been told you have the worst test scores in New England. You need to do something about test scores. We're not in that particular situation. We're not a Pawtucket where it's your test scores aren't in the basement, but on the other hand, your buildings are in the basement, and they're literally falling in the basement, and you need to have a school superintendent who knows about school construction. Pawtucket is actually going through that process right now, and I will tell you that Pawtucket will be appointing its superintendent Thursday night. Both of them, though, think that, stress that sitting down with the school committee is the first step in terms of this process. Once they sit down with the school committee, then they will work with the committee in terms of what do you think the interview committee, the search committee should look like? How many people, what constituencies, what backgrounds? Here's the pros and the cons. You can have the search committee of 22 people, and with 22 people, it's going to be very cumbersome and timely, but it's going to be very representative. On the other hand, you can have the search committee of 7 or 8 people. They will be more nimble, but on the other hand, it's not as diverse as a committee of 22. One thing that both Mr. Betancourt, who is the retired superintendent who runs NESDEC, and Mr. Arati stressed is, the reality is we are not looking at the best of times. This is not superintendent hiring season. Districts are wrapping up their searches right now. They're not going out to search. That's not to say that both have lots of connections and reputations and so forth, I think Mr. Arati probably has seen more recently. In East Greenwich, for example, who's in the pool, who's not in the pool. But both of them have connections and ways to get the word out so that we will attract the most people. Because one of the things Sue and I stressed was we think that this is an attractive school system. That this is, you know, no offense to you guys, that you're not crazy. There are some school systems that are crazy. I know a superintendent who is now a superintendent here in Rhode Island who was offered a job in Massachusetts, and it was a 4-3 vote, and it was an election year. And he said, no, thank you. I'm not taking the job on a 4-3 vote because I'm one vote away from losing my job 6 months into getting it. You people, you know, I'm very proud of you that you operate well in terms of consensus. After he gets a feel from you in terms of where he wants to go, where either of them want to go with this, they then do the legwork. One of the things Sue stressed is that we're not going to have applications, for example, coming into this building. We're not going to have, you know, things on the photocopy machine here. They do all that outside. And Sue was very adamant on the phone calls, and they both said, no problem, we can handle that. That the process of, you know, pulling applications together and so forth, the mechanics of it would be done outside of the school, outside of this building. One area where they diverged a little bit was in terms of once you sit down and start sorting through the applications, NESDEC will come in and talk to you about process in terms of, for example, you don't ask somebody a question that would be illegal. Like, gee, Mrs. Jones, looks like you're pregnant. How are you going to be our superintendent if you're having babies? Okay? People laugh, but I get, unfortunately, you know, I've had some very awful questions asked by search committees, not at the superintendent level, but at the building principal level. I have had some doozies and so forth. NESDEC then turns it more loose to the search committee to sort through and to pull things once they get the training. Mr. Arati's approach is more hands-on in terms that he will be there at the meetings more to you know, answer your questions, to guide, and so forth. Once the search committee narrows it down, both of them recommended that the search committee gives you an alphabetical list of people that they think are worthwhile for you as a committee, the school committee, to consider. And like I said the last meeting, this is the big, you know, this is the biggest thing you're going to do, probably on your term, you know, while you serve on this committee. You do a budget every year. Last time you picked a superintendent was back in 2004. This is a big, you know, a big deal. I don't think even Mr. Day was here in 2004. They will work with you just like they work with the search committee. Both Mr. Arati and Mr. Bettencourt will work with you in terms of helping you through the interview process in terms of figuring out what exactly you're looking for and the pros and cons of different candidates. They will both do reference checking for you and share those results with you. On the other hand, I will also tell you that I will say that if we're going to hire the superintendent from East Snowshoe, Maine to come here, I'm going to strongly urge the chair to call the superintendent, the chair of the school committee in East Snowshoe, Maine, to get a feels. But they will bring the reference checking. They will do the due diligence in terms of, for example, when I was on the school committee in Pawtucket, we were hiring a principal, and our superintendent found out that he was been allegations of sexual harassment, which is why he was looking for a job from Maine to come to Pawtucket, and that's he was told, the superintendent said, I'm not recommending him, and that's the end of that discussion. So why don't you I've talked very very, very fact-specific. I haven't given you sort of the feel. And Sue, why don't you talk in terms more of the kick the tires approach. One thing I will say is East Greenwich did do an RFP process because they had all the time in the world. And East Greenwich, through the RFP process, chose JE Consulting. They did the formal, let's put it out to bid, we have time, and so forth. So why don't you talk about what I've
So
missed?
when we were talking with NESDEC, we felt that they were very regimented. They would do a great job, and the individual that I spoke to that was in the school district that used them only had positive things to say. Both people only had positive things to say. She did mention that it was quite a while ago, so she couldn't remember specifics, but she didn't remember anything negative. But the feel that I got was they sent us a timeline, and they really felt that they were going to stick to that timeline. Where, speaking with Mr. Arati, he seemed like he was much more willing to work with what the committee wanted to do. Although NESDEC would do that also. But they, I think, would push a little bit harder to do it their way as opposed to do it your way. But again, great references from both groups. Mr. Arati, price-wise, is lower. He has recently worked in Rhode Island, which we thought was a positive, because most likely some of the applicants that have applied in East Greenwich that weren't chosen will probably apply here. If he's already weeded through those individuals, it's going to make our search faster. They both said that they would do the community outreach meetings as requested. Mr. Arati also said that he recently did a survey that went out that the technology department in the school district assisted with in order to get the information out to different people in the community. One of the interesting things about both committees is they pretty much guarantee it for 2 years. So if the recommendation and the person hired doesn't last 2 years, they will do the search again. Mr. Arati said he does it for nothing. NESDEC said that the only thing that we would pay for is additional costs, like additional advertising or copying, that type of thing. In East Greenwich, the individual I spoke with said that he facilitated all of the meetings. He even specifically wanted the room set up in a certain way. He worked with the committees to get questions, and I think he's even submitted some of those questions to you guys. Once the committee, search committee, has chosen, say, 3 candidates to come back to the full school committee, that search committee is defunct. They're done. They no longer have any input or any knowledge of what's going on. It is then 100% in the school committee's hands. And he again works with the school committee to facilitate all of those interviews and works with everybody. And both companies have offered basically the same thing.
So I had a call with Dr. Arati this morning based on a conference call we had with John and Sue yesterday. I was curious about procedure, how it works. So basically, it's some of what you've heard already. If there's a decision to move forward with a JE Consulting, we would hold a school committee meeting. That school committee meeting would be public. JE Consulting would come in, and this is just hypothetical. They would get a feedback from the committee. At that point, they would go to the towns. They would set up meetings with the individual towns. They would set up meetings with individual parent groups from those towns. They would then set up meetings with faculty from the schools as well within those towns, within the district. And the whole point of that is to craft a profile from what the Charahoe community is looking for in a superintendent, bring that back to the school committee so that we would be able to use that input in refining down that candidate pool to the final candidates. So it seemed very thorough. It's a process that's, I was concerned about the understanding of the legal position since legislation has changed recently. How's that influence? And some other questions. Dr. Arati was well versed in it. Obviously, he's been engaged in East Greenwich, so there's a lot of knowledge that he's built up just through that process recently. So from this committee standpoint, I think it's open to questions for folks. And I saw Lisa first, and then Catherine, and then Ms. McAllister.
Thank you, John, Sue, and Ryan for the call this morning. I would like the school committee to also consider Dr. Arati as our preferred choice based on some additional experience he has that's notated through his leadership at Newtown, Connecticut, post the Sandy Hook shooting. As a member of the former member of the Ashaway safety team, as a current member of the middle school safety team, a school committee member, and a parent, I think that perspective, that experience for us is invaluable. And if you look not only at the times in which he served as Newtown superintendent, but then if you look towards his professional presentations, he contributed to his community of educators and to public education by sharing best practice, sharing lesson learned at panels, special organizations. I'm sorry, it's a little hard to talk about this one. So John or Sue didn't mention that, but it's worth us noting and taking a look at what he can bring to our community as we frame the search for a superintendent from the lens of something we don't want to think about happening to our children, from someone that worked at a school system through it happening to their children. And NESDAQ can't bring that to us, and he can. He may think to ask questions or to consider perspectives and experience and policies that we otherwise would not have the lens to ask. And so for me, he's my preferred consultant. All other things being equal, for me, that just puts him in the category of let's go.
Thank you. Catherine, Ms. McAllister, then Miriam.
Yeah, I also would feel that JE Consulting would be my preferred provider as well. I don't know if you got a gut feeling, if any of the three of you got a gut feeling. I don't know if you'd want to share that with us. I think that would be important too. But I liked his presentation better. I thought it was more geared towards our community, felt more personalized. And I know they just wrapped up in East Greenwich, and they did appoint an internal candidate in East Greenwich. So it was Alexis.
I didn't know.
Yeah. So I think he's got that.
That was a very well-kept secret.
I know they didn't,
So
it
that's,
was.
that's hot off the presses, I guess.
Right.
That is hot off the press.
It is. So he has that perspective too, because as we know, we have internal candidates. So I like that he has that perspective as well.
Fair enough. Ms. McAllister.
I was also impressed with him. I do have one question about size of the two consulting firms. How many people does he have working for him, or?
We asked about that. That's a great question, and I apologize for not mentioning Newtown because that did come up too, and I think you here didn't say it. Mr. Arati indicated that he only takes on 2 searches at a time. He is finishing East Greenwich. He is doing one right now in Westport, Massachusetts. And so, I'm sorry, Westport, Connecticut. Big difference.
Yeah.
Big difference. That he does have a slot that we can use right now. It's just, it's good luck.
So he's comfortable with 2?
Yes.
Okay.
He has the bandwidth to take on a second clue. Murant.
We all sound synchronized, but My preference would be also with GE Consulting, and a couple of simple reasons. It felt like more personal approach to us, to the needs of our district. He already sent a list of questions for us to look through. That's reason number one. I felt like we will be of a more desired, more valuable client to the agency, and maybe to him personally as well, due to proximity. Second reason is because of the East Greenwich search, he will be aware of who is in his list, because we are so close. And for the NASDAQ, I felt like we will be just one of the many possible clients. Will be, 10th folder on the shelf to go through in their process. So I felt the results will be better for us as a school district if we go with the GE.
Thank you. Craig?
And he's almost $6,000 cheaper. I'm on board 100%.
Donna, then Bill.
Yeah, that's the other piece, in this tight budget, if it's apples to apples, that I think we need to watch every penny. But I also did some background work, and he did come very highly recommended. So I would lean toward that direction.
Bill?
I'm listening to all of the accolades for this gentleman, so I'd like to make a motion that we appoint him.
So moved.
Motion second to move forward with a superintendent search committee and retain the services of JE Consulting for that search. That's the motion. And the second, discussion. Yes, ma'am.
Last meeting, we formed a small group, one from each town. The first contact with him would be at a full committee meeting.
Both consultants talk about the fact that the first time they meet, they want all of you.
Yeah, I think that's probably.
They want all of you because, let's be blunt, you all bring different perspectives. There are people on this committee who are parents. There are people on this committee who have institutional history. There are former professional educators. Everybody brings something different to the table. In addition to that, I think most importantly, you were put here by your towns. So both of them wanted to meet with all of you. Given that time is of the essence, working with the chair and with Mr. Arati, Sue and I will call him tomorrow, is we will try to find a day next week to get him, here, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, at a reasonable time. It will be a public meeting.
Yes.
Because you are not talking about Mary Jones or Bill Smith. You are talking process. What is the community looking for? What are you looking for as a search? Do you want a search committee of 37 people? Do you want a search committee of 3? And so forth. That's public meeting. That's public discussion. It will not be an executive session. We will try to figure out a date. We'll work with Donna to get the date that the most possible people can come. But I want everyone to understand that, you want somebody in place reasonably soon, like, July, or perhaps more realistically, the beginning of school. You got to get going now.
Yep. That meeting will take probably an hour and a half.
Understood.
2 hours. That's what they plan.
We'll need to book 2 hours for that. Okay, any further discussion on the motion to move forward with the search committee and retain the services of JE Consulting? No, those in favor? Thank you, it's unanimous. Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
The only night that we got booked is the Tuesday night.
Correct.
Next week.
We have Monday. Monday, Tuesday, and possibly Wednesday.
Monday to possibly.
If we don't get a quorum Tuesday, we have a meeting
Yeah.
Wednesday.
So the earliest that we could do this would be next week, Thursday. So
just kind of throwing it out there for
Yep,
people to.
yep. And we'll be circulating times for the committee to review.
We
Okay.
have a meeting on the 11th, too, right? It could be
10th.
Before then, too,
Yeah.
possibly.
Okay. That brings us to letter C, independent management study.
Excuse me, just one question, John. On that public meeting, there's minutes, correct? Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a good point.
Well, this said it was on the agenda. Thought we had kind of, I see that, what is it?
Wasn't there a newer
MS, well, I'm sorry?
Wasn't there a newer one? This is from 1999.
Yeah, this is a newer one, is that what this?
So to refresh, we had letters from the town of Hopkinton and from Senator Morgan. And we had in our packet last time effectively kind of like quotes for efficiency studies from a number of places. And we also had, George pointed out that we had a facilities and financial study done back in, it's 1999 or something like that. And he reminded us, so that was provided into this packet. It was kept on the agenda for this meeting so that we could discuss it, but really it does come down to, based on the reading of what you've seen, what the offerings are, does the committee feel that adding, $50,000 or $100,000 to the budget as a line item for an efficiency study makes sense, and should we do that? It ultimately will boil down to that type of discussion. So it's on here. You had brought it up originally, and so your name was a carryover on it.
So my recollection also was, at the time that we discussed it at the last meeting, I thought we were going to put it off, even the topic of it, until we had another superintendent. Even the idea of having an efficiency study, we were going to put it off until we have a new superintendent.
Yeah, so I think, while that might be the perception, what I would say is that if we are going to move forward with an efficiency study, as well as the formal appointment of a superintendent, then it does make sense to put that into our budget now, so that as part of the mandate of that new superintendent, that efficiency study can be incorporated into their goals and objectives, and they have the funds necessary to accomplish those goals and objectives. So it's just a discussion point. It's up to the committee to make a decision here. Bill?
I read this whole thing again, which maybe nobody else did, but just a couple quick things here, which never got implemented. Charleston, attendance boundary should be adjusted if necessary to eliminate overcrowding. Richmond, Charter Act needs to be changed so the district can operate more efficiently. These are things that were brought out in 1999, and for whatever reason, the towns, because they control Charter Hold. We don't do anything over here unless we get complete support from the towns. And when none of the stuff is implemented, so if I cannot endorse an efficiency study when nobody's going to follow through with any of this stuff other than point fingers at us.
As I researched when Mr. Abbott last meeting talked about this particular study, so I started to look in Mr. Ritchie's office to see if I could find it, and I was able to find it. And it was actually in a book, which was a facilities book of a 5-year building committee, and it was the beginning of it. So just what I would wonder is, what problem are we trying to solve right now? And I think we need to really identify that, because the quotes that were provided to you were general. And the companies said, well, what is it specifically you'd like us to look at? For example, if you're looking at school start times, do you want to study the cost of that and what the financial effects might be? If you're looking at fewer and newer schools? Are you going to commission a study to find out what is that going to look like? So my thought when I found that after that research was, again, what problem are we trying to resolve? And does it make sense more as once the necessity of building construction committee gets started, which is their first meeting is this week, if they identify specific things that we need to look at, then it might come out of that group that we need to do a study based on what they want to review more.
Good point. Craig?
I've got to agree with Bill. I mean, this was written 21 years ago, and a lot of the underlying tensions are still there.
Yeah, I think Jane stated my point for me, thank you. When I read this report, it didn't really hit on what I think are the concerns of some of the town council members in terms of overspending and maybe management top-heavy and things like that, which is the impression that I get from the town councils, that some of you feel that way. But that's not really what this addressed at all. So I think we'd really have to get a narrowed scope from the town council so that we understand what are you actually looking for. Is it a consensus of what you're looking for? Because again, I don't know that there's even a consensus among the 3 town councils to have a management study. I haven't seen that. I've only seen it from Hopkinton, I believe. And what information are they trying to glean from this report? Because this, I don't think, would have addressed any of their present concerns. I couldn't advocate for an expenditure of that size until we really honed in on what they were looking for.
I wholeheartedly agree that we need to identify the problem before we try to find a solution. I appreciate George brought this forward, and I understand why it's controversial. One thing of note, this talks about the concerns of each town. For whatever reason, Charlestown was left out, page 2-7. So I'm sure that's an oversight or somebody ripped it out in anger or whatever. I would also like to point out this was designed to deal with overcrowding in Charahoe. And the projections from this report are more than 700 students higher than where we were at the end of this report. So this is definitely not what I would consider for an efficiency study. This was trying to solve an infrastructure problem. And my look at a management efficiency study would be much different than this, and I would look forward to participating in defining a tight scope for that.
Agreed.
Just to add, I agree that I think we need to identify our concerns or our questions before, narrow the scope before we hire and spend that kind of money.
Right. Sheila?
Just quickly, I think maybe in the process of identifying what the 3 towns are interested in finding more about, we could also encourage them, this was, I believe, paid for by 3 towns, wasn't it? Yeah, and I think that whoever's requesting the study should consider phoning them up for it.
Yes. I agree. John?
I will share with you that I have lived through a management study in another district. Probably 15 years ago, it was Warwick. Warwick brought in an accounting firm because the goal was, how can we save money in the budget? I'm sorry. About 15 years ago, Warwick brought in an accounting firm. How can we save money in the budget? You know, spending is out of control and so forth. We got back recommendations such as, the contract says you can have 25 kids in a class. Why are these special ed classes don't have 25 kids in them? Right, and there was clearly a lack of understanding of some of the roles that schools play. I was the special ed lawyer for Warwick, and I was asked to comment on the special ed section, and I was kind of appalled that they were paying close to $100,000 for it, and I believe the city council paid for it, not the school committee. So I think that you also have to remember that if you go down this path, you know, statistics don't lie, statisticians do. who you choose as doing this report may tell you what your answer is going to be.
Understood. Additional comments or discussion on this topic? No? Thank you, committee members. This moves us to letter D, school start times.
I asked for this agenda item because I had some interest from the community about discussing school start times. You know, we know that our middle school and high school children start school very early, and we have some children who are on the bus at 6 o'clock, 6:05, I think is the earliest bus time. I don't think it's any surprise that teenagers don't get enough sleep. I didn't get enough sleep as a teenager. I would reckon most of you did not either. And the pressures of being a teenager haven't lessened any from when we were teenagers. Before we went down the rabbit hole of looking at school start times, I wanted to see if there was any interest among other committee members to explore a little bit further. I say that fully understanding that there's a cost associated with changing school start times. The town of East Greenwich did that a few years ago. They had an ad hoc committee. My husband actually was a part of it, which he told me about after I had requested information from them. And they ended up switching start times to make things a little bit later for their middle school and high school children. The town of Barrington did it, and the feedback from Barrington has been mixed. And some people have said, nope, bad idea, and they might revert at some point. So before I put any more effort into it, I wanted to see if anybody else had any interest in exploring it. Now might not be a great time. Certainly, I don't think it's something we could implement for 2021, but that's why it's on the agenda.
Did you anticipate me putting up
Yes,
my hand?
ma'am, I did.
I almost did it just because you pointed at me. I was like, oh, me?
No, you got that look.
So very interested in the topic. I think it's worth at least asking the permanent superintendent to explore the impact it would have on athletics, transportation, similar to what you led us through as we adapted the new vacation schedule, and we reduced February and started after Labor Day. I think the process that you used for that was really thoughtful, it was effective, and it was collaborative, and ultimately we all made the decision. I think we can do that again. But both, I think, this topic and what we were just talking about in the previous item, as we're speaking about it, I'm thinking, oh, these are great questions for the superintendent's interview. And we can actually choose, right, with Dr. Arati, we can say that applicants have to submit a 500-word response on how, you know, what would your approach be to managing a $55 million budget? What is your philosophy and experience with start times? We can kind of maximize the money we're spending for the superintendent search to get some of this work done and this thinking done for us. So I say yes, but let's make it a search committee question and have somebody else think about it for us first.
The only issue I see with this is that any time that we move the school start time is, we're going to have to.
Developmental research is that younger students are capable of starting earlier. It's the older students who need to start later. So we actually could get the elementary school students. We want to study, who do we want to start later for? It's the emerging adolescent that needs more sleep. It's not the 6-year-old. They're up. They're ready. So we might actually be able to deal with your concern as well. It's not everybody starting later. It's targeted developmental groups starting later.
Great.
I just have a couple of comments. First of all, as a parent of 4 kids, we used to tell our kids, go to bed earlier. Second of all, we're not just impacting Charahoe, we're impacting Narragansett, South Kingston, Westerly. And just food for thought. In the Midwest, I think Colorado's starting it. They can do 4 days a week, longer days.
Okay.
Just food for thought.
Okay. That's radical, but very interesting.
Saves money.
Additional?
Yes, ma'am.
Just a reminder about Rhode Island law is that students do have to attend upon 180 days, according to the state of Rhode Island. So they may have more flexibility in Colorado, but just something to remember.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
In that case, you're going to have to look at the rest of the world and see how much school they go to, whether it's China or Russia or Japan, and they may go a lot longer than ours do. So you'd have to look at all of that. I'm not sure we need to go that far, but if you're going to look at times and days and how much time they spend, you're going to have to look internationally, which would be a real waste of time.
Agreed. Anything else, committee? Nope, thank you. Let's move on to letter E. Adjustments to the fiscal year 21 budget. This is a recurring agenda item until we formally close and send this to the voters on the 24th. This is an opportunity for committee members to make recommendations or talk about the budget. That's correct.
The vote is April.
Yes, correct. So we have March 10th and March 24th where as opportunities for further adjustment. So I didn't make it. This is not the last opportunity. Sorry. Thank you, John. Anything from the committee members? Yes, sir.
When, I don't know if everyone has the document from the last meeting with the proposed cuts. The budget update number 3, revised proposed cuts. We skipped over the recommended cut line item number 60. And we didn't have discussion about it. I'd like us to reconsider that line.
I'm sorry, I don't have that with me. Can you tell me what that line and what it was?
Yeah, it was proposed reduction of $61,709.61. Eliminate BMAI at the middle school.
Sorry, are we amending to pre-discussion?
I was trying, I can make a
Organized.
motion if you'd like.
No, I'm fine with, there's no, unless you want to move forward with motion and have it under discussion. Otherwise, it is just on the table for discussion for the committee. And if, based on what you hear, you decide to make a motion.
That was how I was approaching it, just to sort of toss it around, because I didn't know what it was last meeting, so I had to do a little, gain a little understanding, to understand even what the line was, and so I want to just bring it back for some discussion.
Okay, thank you. Catherine?
So I purposefully did not mention that one because I couldn't vote for it as a proposed cut, as a cut. I wouldn't.
BMA, got it.
I would not be in favor of cutting a BMA position. I think that the more support that our students have, the better the school district is. And I think even children who don't need the services of a behavior management assistant still benefit from having behavior management assistants in the building because it helps maybe regulate some of their peers and kind of brings a cohesion that is difficult to attain in today's elementary school setting and middle school setting. I think from what I've heard at the middle school level, there are some kids who could use a lot more support than is currently budgeted for. So it was an intentional non-mention on my part, but I appreciate the discussion, but that's not something that I could agree to.
Yeah, I'll just follow that up. I agree with that position. I would not be in favor of eliminating it. And this is based out of some experience that we had in terms of some challenges at Richmond Elementary. And the BMA being put into that position and some of the success of it. I know that I spoke with Barry at length about this. He was very bullish on the position. He actually, I think, at his first pass of the budget had 6 or 5 that he wanted to bring in, just because in our communities we have, our elementary school and middle school, we have some children who there's just trauma in their lives, and coping with that and dealing with that in a meaningful way that benefits them, while at the same time doesn't detract from the other students and their educational experience. This role seemed to be a kind of a positive step in that direction. So based on those experiences, I am not in favor of moving forward on that. Yes, sir.
So based on what I'm hearing from you, I guess I'd ask Jane if you could clarify what was the reasoning or rationale for bringing that to the list of proposed cuts that gets us to the goal of what we were trying to cut, as opposed to another position? What brought that one onto the list? Was it a change? And we asked you this about some of the things a couple weeks ago, and you were helpful to be able to provide context to say numbers had changed or situations had changed. So what was the rationale for bringing that to the list?
The rationale was it's a new position, so it wasn't in place yet. And it was something that, in speaking with the principal, if we had to make a cut and he had to reduce his budget, he would prefer to put it off for a year than cut another position in his building. So he still felt the need for it, but knowing that, budget's tough right now, looking at the budget for his school, he said that's something that we would, if we have to eliminate something, then that would be it, and then we would add it. He would want to have it again the following year, if we could move forward with that. So it was a recommendation from the principal and also the special ed director, but again, there were no good decisions to make, honestly. At the point, this was one of the last positions put on here, put on the list.
Donna.
But again, what I'm hearing you say, Jane, is it's basically kicking the can down the road. Because it's not that the position isn't important to have. What I'm hearing you say is the principal is saying, okay, I will suck it up and go another year without this position, but next year I'll bring it back into the budget. So.
Yes, sir.
That's what I'm hearing as well. And because we asked them to do that, again, just based on asking the principals to do that and Jane to work with them and bring the proposed cuts, and that's the one they brought. Mm-hmm. Because of that, I moved that we make that cut from line item $61,709.61 to eliminate the BMA 1 position.
Could you repeat the number again?
$61,709.61.
We have a motion. We have a second. We have no second, sir. I think that lets you know. The motion is not put before the committee. Yes, Barbara? Yes, ma'am.
Barbara Capalbo from Hopkinton. I realize you have today, and I think you've got 2 more times when you might be able to make changes, although the next meeting, I believe, is going to be with the public, and I don't think you make any changes at that time. I would like to encourage you strongly, again, to cut the budget, because Hopkinton needs to get under the 4% cap, and we're still above it. And if we're above it, we were almost above it last year. This is happening again, and it's going to happen again. And we can't do this to my citizens. You can't bring in all the consultants you want and all the counselors to help these children when the parents are spending so much on their taxes, their health care, and the fact that they have to function. We really need this to cut. I think we need you to cut, if you can at least look at it, is $300,000, if not $4,000, but $300,000 may get us under the 4% cap. And I have to say, in regard to the last conversation, I also had no idea what a BMA was, but after the discussion and listening, I do think it was probably a valuable position, and it will become more valuable. To try to correct behavior at the beginning is a lot easier than trying to correct it at the end. So I would rather you didn't cut $61,000 for a BMA, but I would rather you cut $61,000 from the fund balance. If you can take that fund balance, I have always wanted 2%. I think you're at 2.8. If we could compromise and get to 2.4, I think we can get part of our $300,000. And the other place I would like you to take a look at is healthcare, is to try to drop it another %. What has occurred in Charahoe over the last couple of years, and I don't know everyone, I only know 2 of them, Mr. Ritchie and Mr. Brian Stanley, Mr. Stanley. These were long-term, very difficult, very expensive, and I understand that, but it's not going to happen all the time. And you cannot determine your health care by the worst things that can possibly happen, or we're all not going to be able to risk living because something will happen all the time. Please take a look at health care and pensions, or pensions I don't think you can, but health care you can, and the fund balance. Because I think you've done a very good job cutting as much as you can. And so far it's been about 1.2 million, which is great, and I appreciate it. But I really need you to try to look further.
So, point of clarification, you made a comment about those who participated in the health plan.
Yeah.
Jane, if you wouldn't mind.
I just want to clarify, were you talking about Mr. Ritchie as superintendent, or were you saying that he was in the health insurance?
Oh, well, just because he was ill.
Okay, but because someone's ill doesn't mean that they take insurance with our district.
Okay,
For
fine,
example,
then-
myself, my insurance, I can tell you, is with my husband. So
I
it
understand.
doesn't cost the district anything.
Right, but in that case, you have been saying that the health has had amazing rates. The rates are rising because you've had a lot of issues.
Yeah.
And I think it's across the board. I don't think it's just Charahoe. I'm sure it's across the board.
I think we get the point in terms of you want us to target fund balance
Right.
and healthcare for
Rather
the
than-
reductions.
Rather than individuals.
Right.
And I think some of and I have never asked you to cut teachers, and I'm not asking you to cut BMAs. I didn't ask that either. But I think there are places you can cut. And I think these 2 are strong areas. They give you flexibility, and they don't take away from your projects, your programs, your teachers, and it certainly doesn't take away from your capital.
Thank you. Mr. Luzon.
Yeah,
Sorry.
a couple weeks back. A couple of weeks back, I had a couple ideas, and so I sat down with Mrs. Daly, and we discussed them, and she got back some information to me, which I found very illuminating. I thought a novel idea was we have a dean of students retiring, and why fill the position? We could save money on that position. Until we got numbers, and those numbers were that at the middle school level, there was 340 incidents this year so far. At the high school, there was 1,100. That to me was very shocking. So I never brought up cutting that position. So I'm just giving that story to correlate what you were asking. You can rest assured, we will address the fund balance. We're just not there yet.
Further comments from committee members? Brant.
Just to bring clarity, maybe help Dave understand why, for example, I didn't second your motion. It's because of that. The BMA, I believe, again, based on my personal experience with my own child in the Richmond school, presence of the BMA made a material difference in the quality of education for my own child. That's why, you know, even though I understand where Hopkinton wants to be, where Hopkinton needs to be from the town perspective, at the same time, BMA is a value that I'm not willing to cut out.
So Barbara thinks the fund balance is at 2.8% currently. Can you?
That's about right. We
Okay.
had originally had it at 3%.
Yep.
And then at the last meeting, Jane had discussed taking an additional $100,000 out of the fund balance to offset the Richmond DEM playground type of thing. So when you add those two together, we're approximately 2.8%.
Can you quickly, if not, we can hold.
Can you quickly tell me if we cut it to 2.5%, what that equates to in a monetary cut?
Yes.
Thank you.
Well, she's double checking that. Bill?
Yes. What we're trying to do is figure out what our problems are gonna be, our issues financially and stuff like that. I'm looking at transfer of funds here to fix various things here. $17,000, tonight's agenda. You know, this is something that we cannot predict, we cannot forecast. So I think that Barbara makes a good point there, that maybe we should gamble a little bit on the health care, a little bit, maybe gamble on the health, on the fund balance, because we're shifting, we have the ability that towns do not have, is to shift our funds around as needed. And I really think that, you know, in spite of what you're hearing, that, you know, this budget is going to be in a lot of problems, and if it doesn't pass in Hopkinton, I don't think that Richmond and Charleston are going to be able to carry the load again. So I think that, you know, we really need to try to reach a compromise, if we're going to use that terminology, with the town of Hopkinton, and hopefully after we do this, they won't turn around and badmouth us to the point where they won't support the budget.
Okay.
So I would suggest that we do find the money that we need to get Hopkinton into a favorable position so that we can get this budget passed.
Thank you. Thank you. And Lisa and then Catherine.
So I would support Barbara and Bill's idea to reconsider the healthcare budget. A point, whatever that might mean financially, if Sue felt that was a reasonable adjustment, and that's something I think that with Sue's recommendation, I could vote for tonight. I'm not ready, as Craig said, to address or cut the fund balance just yet. We have time to do that. But two other points of consideration I've thought of tonight. One is, if you recall, when Catherine asked for that list of 1.2 million cuts, she asked it excluding athletics. And if we're really going to start talking about equitable distribution of cuts, then we need to put that on the table and say, what are some cuts to athletics that may need to be made in order to meet these goals too? You intentionally left that off. But now if we're talking about our employees' health care, BMAs, okay, let's bring athletics into the conversation, please, and see really where the whole community stands on this idea. So I would like that to be brought to us, some cuts for athletics, suggested cuts for us to consider and get feedback from. The other thing is, Jane, based on your conversation with Craig around the retiring dean, would there be any interest in exchanging the dean, who's dealing with incidents on the back end and numbers that Craig just shared, with letting that position retire and hiring an additional BMA to help mitigate proactively the behavior that leads to those reports? Would there be any consideration around that? Do we add 1 or 2 BMAs to the middle school in exchange for the dean? And with the savings?
So just, to give you the numbers, I have 442 incidents at the middle school and 1156 at the high school, and that was basically as of the end of semester 1.
Those are 2 positions or 1?
No, we have 1 next year in the budget. We have 1 dean at the middle school. This year we have more than that, but next year we're reducing that to 1.0 FTE. And then at the high school, we have 2 deans. And it is double the number of incidents. I can certainly bring it back to the principal. I think that using the BMA to reduce behaviors is something that we did new this year at the elementary school at Richmond, and I think that so far has been very successful. And the next steps were to try that at other elementary schools and at the middle school. Honestly, I feel that it's very new, and to attempt that at a high school with a number of classes and sections.
The middle school, not
Oh,
the
we
high
only
school.
have, so we have 1 dean at the middle school next year in the budget.
Okay, who was the one that was retiring? Was that a high school?
There is actually a dean at the high school and at the middle school retiring at the end of the school year. So there's actually 2 this year.
Catherine?
You could, to go down to 2.5%, it would be about another $179,000.
All right. Okay. I would prefer to cut there than to cut healthcare, and maybe it's just because I deal with healthcare at work, but you would be surprised how a couple of bad claims, right, people actually using their insurance, absolutely blows it all up. And your rates the next year are significant. And I know we're already dipping, correct me if I'm wrong, Sue, I think we're already dipping into some of our reserves this year to offset. And so that will already be depleted. I would really be hesitant to cut further, unless that's a recommendation that you would make.
I did speak with WB a couple of weeks ago, and his recommendation is to go no lower than what we've gone.
Craig?
So approximately for every 1/10 of a point.
It's about 60,000, approximately?
I don't know. You sure?
Okay.
We have some comments from the audience. I just want to make sure committee members first, and so we'll go Dave, and then Donna, did you have your hand up?
Well,
David's first, okay, then all right. This is-
So I appreciated that exercise earlier as the new guy, being able to make motions that fail. Because, because part of that is, I'm just trying to understand, engage. And I'm trying to do the same thing right now with the fund balance conversation. Because again, I'm just here thinking, okay, I'm hearing what Bill's saying, and I'm agreeing with you that we have to get this so that it works for Hopkinton, so that it can be approved. And for me, part of the idea of that is the sooner you alleviate that stress, the sooner it can move forward with some positive momentum toward getting the budget passed. So when we talk about, yes, we have more meetings and why the rush, before ministry I had a marketing background, part of the rush is just to make it more positive so that we can get this train moving in the right direction and people feel like that stress is alleviated. So I'm looking to gauge that, the same thing with the fund balance conversation today. So I'm not making a motion yet.
And philosophically, I'm in favor of moving in that direction. I think that we have a meeting with the towns on the 3rd, yes, and then a subsequent meeting on the 10th, and I think that feedback from that public forum and then back in here is kind of what I was waiting to reduce further on that. Then we had Donna and then Murat.
And it doesn't happen that often, Dave, so don't feel that was a problem. It doesn't happen that often that it's not seconded. This is just a very sensitive issue, behavior. And what I really like the idea of looking closer at the athletics. At the last meeting, I questioned the amount of money that went into I thought it was just the football helmets and the expensive equipment that we're providing our children. And I think that's very important, but tonight we learned that there's a chunk of money sitting in a SAF that could be used for equipment. So maybe that's an avenue we can go to for some of these athletics. If they're collecting money at the gate, why not use that money specifically for the athletic event and the equipment and the new shirts and all of that? So I really like the idea of looking a lot closer at the athletics.
Comment on that, Jane?
Just to update you, remind you, the last time in Budget Update 3, we did cut $14,913 from different athletic lines.
Yeah.
And in previous budget updates, we had also reduced. What I just want to clarify, I think what I heard, I mean, at this point, we would really be looking at teams. So is that what you're looking for? Because we've really cut, we've looked through all of the athletic lines over the past few months and reduced many of them. So at this point, it would be affecting a team is really the only.
Okay, so it would affect the team.
It could.
So when you reduce the number of referees or the amount of money that we spend on referees, that was not reducing the number of referees, that was finding money from somewhere else.
So when, like, for example, I want to just make sure we reduce referees. Yes, when we reduced officials, referees, that was because, the athletic director looked at the budget and said, okay, well, I'm planning for, we're going to be in X number of playoffs. So he said, all right, I'll reduce that estimate as to the number of playoffs we'll be in. And that's why we made that cut.
Okay.
But if we were looking for further cuts, we'd have to start looking at, okay, what teams can't play next year? And then, yes, that will affect the number of referees. That might, it will affect maybe multiple lines. But that would be the kind of money I think that you'd be looking for at this point.
So, Lisa, you have a comment on this topic?
Yes, Nora, if you don't mind, just I can respond to this. So, yes, Jane, yes. We have a new configuration of school committee members. We have 3 new members that were not present for some of the decisions that we made impacting this budget around hockey and around swim. And just those teams, when it'd be interesting to hear how this new committee here, how many students are actually on those teams, because there are collaborative teams with other districts, what our cost is for those teams, and then how many students they're actually reaching versus some of our athletic programs that are reaching, tens and dozens of students. We have new members. I think at this time it would make sense to explore all of the teams, and not necessarily, we can look at football, we can look at basketball, but there are some decisions that we all made at a different budget time under, Mr. Ritchie, who was a huge supporter of athletics, and Mr. Stanley, whose son was almost an Olympic swimmer, but was our only swimmer. We might need to look at those things. Those might be teams of privilege that we can't afford right now, given the numbers. So yes, Jane, teams.
All right, so we've got a number. So on the sports topic alone, I do want to close off because Murat is next in line to bring the comments to the floor. So is it directly related to the sports topic?
Oh, absolutely.
Bill, yours as well?
Oh, definitely.
Bill, then Craig.
I'm probably the biggest sports enthusiast over the number of years here. We've added teams here. In hockey. More than likely, there's probably less than a half a dozen of our students going on the Narragansett co-op hockey team. I don't know the numbers. But, they play at Boss Arena. There's an expense there that we share. The big thing that I see out of the athletics over the years, and educators will tell you this, the kids that are in sports are a better student prior to their season and during their season, and a lot of them. I'm not talking about we have a lot of students that are scholar athletes, that are in the top of their classes and stuff like that. But the ones that we really need to keep in school so they can graduate, a lot of them rely on the sports. And like I say, prior to the season, they have to have their grades up, and during the season, they have to have their grades up. And unfortunately, coaches will tell you, and the athletic will tell you that some of these kids, once the season's over with, their grades start to tank. And this is what keeps these kids, you know, the old cliche, keep kids in sports out of courts type of thing. And it's a lot truer than we think that is. And I don't think that we're overloaded, but I notice now we have a gymnastics team. I don't know how that is funded. We got a swimming group now. I don't think we do it individually anymore. So, you know, when you keep adding sports programs, you've got expenses only if it's bus transportation for these kids. So I think that to cut sports, just to cut the budget, is doing the kids a disservice, because there's a lot of kids that need sports to keep them interested in academics.
Thank you for that comment. Craig?
I'm just going to warn you all a little bit. Barry and I have talked about this in years past. He said, you want to get parents out? You talk about cutting sports, and you will see this room fill right up. And they're not going to be nice and polite either. That's the reality. But as far as swimming, I think, if I recall right, it was only a $200 investment on our part for swim trunks. And second of all, hockey, we have greater than 50% of the team now. We also educate the high school level almost 1,100 kids. This isn't my alma mater where we have 500 in Narragansett. We have 1,100 kids here with a variety of sports. And I think all the teams are full. It's not like we're feeling granted, we never did the swim, but that was a co-op, if I remember right. Personally, I'm not in favor of it, so.
Murat, you've been very patient, and I apologize for that, but we do have is this a sports comment?
It is sports.
Is it succinct and quick?
This is specifically sports.
I'll wait since it's going.
Thank you, Maria.
I think if you're going to address the sports, you need to give people warning. You need to say, we're discussing it, we'll deal with it next year. It's the reason that I'm asking for fund balance and health care, so you don't cut things arbitrarily in the next 2 weeks so we can make everybody happy. So I do think it's a great idea. I definitely think you should look at it. But it's not something you can do in 2 weeks. It's simply rude to everyone and shouldn't be done, which is why I'm asking for you to look at the fund balance. Really, we need 2%, not 2.4 or 2.5. We need 2%. We have to get your budget passed, and we have to pass our budget.
Thank you.
And this is what I want you to do. So yes, it's sports. That's all.
Thank you.
Got to look elsewhere.
So my comment probably will be less popular than sports topic, but I'm going to resurrect my, in a less intense form, my previous comment I made on one of the previous meetings where I said, maybe we should look now, again, because of the times, maybe we should look at some classes consolidation, because I believe at some point Jane gave us a list of classes with the enrollment, and some of those numbers were fairly low. And there was a lot of duplication as well. So I'm not going to ask, as I did last time, for canceling some of them, because that wasn't received well. But maybe there is a way to cut the expenses by consolidating, duplicating classes in one class, right? So instead of having two art flowering class, we can have one. So provide the same educational possibilities, but instead of holding two classes, hold one.
Yes, sir. Sorry, sir. Thank you for being patient.
Bob Cardozo, Richmond. I used to sit on the committee when Bill was here and a few of the others. I'm also a teacher. I also did special ed. Thank God I'm retired. When we do the budget, You guys are the board of directors. That's what the whole thing is about. Education's a business. You're gonna have to understand that. It's the biggest business in the state of Rhode Island. It could be the biggest industry in America. You're supposed to give guidance. This is sort of nuts, to be honest about it. You got to tell the administrators what the bottom line is, and they work at it. That's how a budget works. Mr. Merrick, I apologize, I don't know you and I've mispronounced your name, but you made a wonderful point the other day when I was here. Number of courses, electives with small enrollments. There's 14 courses that have less than 15 kids. Our assets are our teachers and our employees. Our product are our courses. Our consumer are the kids. The consumers aren't buying your products. You got to get rid of them. And the assets. You're going to have to start cutting. Hopkinton wants cuts. All well and good. They don't want to give up one of their front offices. You have two elementary schools, 2 front offices. We eliminate one of them, $150,000. That's money. We can have that one principal go to 2 different schools. Half a day here, half a day there, whatever. They can figure it out. It's not a safety issue. You know how to dial 911. So does he. And that's how fast people get there. These are hard things that you're going to have to come across. When I sat here, we had a budget that was in the 40s. Bill was here. And we had the law of big numbers. When we said, oh, let's have a budget, let's have a reserve of 2 to 3. Well, the budget numbers supported that because that's what we knew what we had to have for a fund balance or a safety net. When you start to figure out that we have a $50 and $60 million budget, hey folks, those numbers get bigger. We don't need the money. We have insurance. We have the ability to move money from one spot to another, unlike the towns. It's a bottom line budget. It is not a line item budget. And you have to stop this thinking that it's a line item. We're going to say 50,000 here, 10,000 there. It's a $52 million budget. Agree on a bottom number and work towards it. Your administrators are your employees. Tell them what you want and make them come up with the right answers. Because the taxpayers happen to be the people that have to vote on this. And to put it in terms of a corporation, they're the stockholders. Thank you.
Additional comments, recommendations, or discussion topic on the budget? Yes, sir.
Along those same lines, we're trying to, I heard what the chair said about go to the public forum when we get together.
That was a personal opinion.
When we get together with the towns.
Yeah.
And let them reflect. But in this case, we're hearing the strong voice of Hopkinton that continues to come to the meetings. And I go to the town meetings in Hopkinton because I'm involved in the town of Hopkinton, obviously. So I've heard them really loud and clear. I think we have. So we already know what's going to be said. We already know what we're going to hear. We already know what the number is. So I'm going back to that. It's we've gone through all of these things and said these are the things that we don't want to take out, things that are left here. There's nothing else good that we can think of to take out. There's nothing else that anybody wants to take out. So again, back to the fund balance conversation of why do we wait till we go back and forth and have more stress? Why not make the reduction and put that budget forward so that we've got the towns on board and we're on the same page? I'm just trying to get to where we've got to get in a few weeks anyway without making it more difficult and stressful. So I'll move for 2. So I move that we reduce the fund balance to 2%.
I'll second it.
Motion and a second to reduce the fund balance to 2%. Discussion. Murat.
Personally, I feel that's going to be too tight. It's, and I understand where we want to be. That cutoff 0.8%, that roughly 60K per 0.10 will get us there, fair and quick. My problem is with that, and I support the general direction. I think we should lower it from 2.8. I just have trouble saying that 2 exact is the right number. I want to have just a little bit of cushion there. And again, it may be that the 2%, but 2% is actually a legal requirement from what I understand, right?
That's right.
Right. So.
That's our policy.
No, that's the policy.
I don't
That's
think
a
it's
policy.
legal position, it's a policy position.
Okay. I would feel more in favor of voting if we say go for 2.2. That gives the town the 360 saving, gives the Hopkinton what they want, what they need to be to get under the 4% increase, and still leaves us a little bit of cushion on top of the 2%. That's my personal feeling.
Thank you. So I have Catherine, Craig, and then Bill.
My problem with cutting the fund balance to 2% is anything that's not used goes to offset next year's balance. And my opinion is we're kicking the road down kicking the can down the road. I should stop using that because I never say it right the first time.
I like kicking the road down the can.
We're kicking the can down the road. Hopkinton, you know we're going to be in this boat again next year. We're adding more children. We're going to be having the same discussion again next year. And we're going to have, if we cut it to 2%, that's even less money to offset next year's budget. And then I feel like we've got an even bigger mess on our hands. So I appreciate the sentiment. I agree we've got to cut it. I would eventually go to 2.4, as Barbara suggested. So I'm with you on that. I had originally asked to see what 2.5 was at the last meeting, but then there was zero support for it. Like nobody else brought that up. And I'm thinking that was intentional, which is why I left it where it was last time. I can't support 2, but I can support 2.4.
Thank you, Catherine. Craig.
Committee, not as long as Bill, of course, but I've heard people say, well, the towns have got good surpluses because they do their due diligence. So does Cheraho. They do their due diligence and they scrimp and save and shift money here and save throughout the year and they come within maybe 98% of their proposed budget. I've also heard in the past how I asked the question, I said, well, what happens if we get it down to 0 and we go in the negative? Oh, just come to the towns. They'll be there for you. I don't think that's going to happen. We were warned 7 years ago that the more we kept dipping into this, harping on what Catherine just said, we're going to come to a point, we're going to be at that 0. We were warned, and we're getting pretty close to it. So, like I said, and be honest, I want to hear what the taxpayers have to say next week. So personally, I'm not going to vote in favor of it based on that.
Bill.
I'm not going to vote for it either, but I figured we needed to get this discussion out there. We need to have some other ideas of what other committee members felt. My good friend, Mr. Cardoza, brought up some very good points here about us being in control of this. We need to take responsibility. Bob was a very vocal member of the committee, and he served this committee in the town of Richmond. And he made some good points. He made some good points about what it costs us to run the 2 elementary schools in the town of Hopkinton. But nobody will go anywhere near that. Nowhere near that. 400 kids for 2 principals. 1 principal in Richmond for close to that number of kids. 1 principal in Charleston for about 350 or so.
All in one building, Bill.
Fair enough. Before we divert, Lisa.
So, Dave, I love that you're here to work. Like, you've been here a couple of meetings and you came ready to do the work, and I really like that. So even though I'm not going to support this motion, I wanted you to hear that from me. The reason I'm not going to support the motion is the same reason I said before. Craig's absolutely right. We have a process that includes all of our stakeholders. Yes, Frank and Barbara have been here every meeting. Yes, they send us emails. They are strong representatives for our town. But we have a built-in opportunity for at least a minimum by the Charahoe Act of 25 constituents from each town to come to us and give feedback. It's really important that we follow our process. It's built that way so that we get the broadest perspective possible from our town. And we will have 25 members from Hopkinton that aren't necessarily always attending town council meetings because they have other obligations, but they'll come to this one. If we cut the fund balance now, we have very little direction. We have very little we can cut afterwards. So it's still too soon. I agree with most of my colleagues here that ultimately we're probably going to end up doing some cuts towards the fund balance. Mr. Cardoza, who I feel like, I don't know, was staring through my head there for a little bit, made a good point about the number is so big now that maybe we need to shift our thinking around this 2 to 3% because we're at this larger number. That was it was kind of like a light bulb moment for me. Like, oh, okay, maybe I should be thinking about how much is in reserve, not which percent is in reserve. Right? Yeah, sure, this is good thinking. Let's let the voters give us input, though. And I purposefully said, let's put athletics on the table. Because I do want everybody to come to the meeting and talk to us about what do we really value in the community and what don't we want to cut. Yes, athletics keeps kids in school. I know that. But so does Charahoe Tech. And we cut a lot of equipment from Charahoe Tech. Mm-hmm. So we have to represent everybody. So we'll get there, not 2%. We will definitely get there, just not yet. But thanks for coming to work. I like it.
Yes, sir.
In all my years on this board, I've learned sometimes you have to withdraw a motion. Could I withdraw my motion?
Yes, sir.
Second.
Motion's withdrawn.
Second.
Bill, you withdraw your second?
Oh, yes.
Thank you, sir. Folks, I'm going to take both of your comments and questions. I do want to say it's 9:30, and I will not be voting in favor of any type of extension this evening. So we need to move it forward. I just want a time check. So Sheila, I think you were first, and then Barbara.
What if we used the fund balance for, in the past couple of years, other than to offset, trying to balance the budget?
We used fund balance, I don't know the exact number, but we used fund balance to shore up the brick walls at Hope Valley School.
And Richmond Root.
Thank you.
And Richmond Root.
And how much was that over $1 million? At
It's
Hope Valley
9:30.
School?
It's 9:30 and I wasn't prepared.
It was over $1 million.
It's the rainy day fund. Yes, ma'am.
Correct. But 2 to 3% is the same percent, whether it's 50,000 or 60,000. You're still keeping 2% or 3%. It's the same number. You aren't losing numbers or losing money because you go to 60% with 2%. If you have 2% of 60,000, you've got 2% of 60,000. You have 2% of 50,000, 2% of 40,000. It's just math. That's not a problem. Having several million, because 2% is a couple million, you have it sitting there, which is fine, because you do need it. When
Just
Richmond
for point of
has it,
clarification,
and
you
when
said
Hope Valley.
that we have a couple million.
How much do you have?
Sue, can you tell us what's in the fund balance?
If, from what you've already taken, that would leave 1.5 in the fund balance.
Okay.
So as of, at the 2.8%, we're at 1.5.
Right.
Yes.
So we would be coming down to approximately 1.2 for under 2%.
And 1.2 million is fine.
1.1
Because
is
every
less
time
than
you've needed it,
payroll,
it's
right?
been $1 million, and that's fine, but you can still move money around in your budget. It is still a bottom line budget.
Mr. Cardoza.
I don't know off the top of my head. We'll probably get that for the next meeting.
I'll apologize for my tone.
Yeah.
Catherine made an excellent point. If you don't solve your problem now, all you're doing is putting it off for another year. And we've been doing that for how many years? 5, 10 years, you've been kicking the can down the road. If you don't start to make your hard decisions now, when are you going to make them? Yes, you have to start to make these decisions. One of the ones you have to make is, we used to call it the rise when I taught there, to whatever now. Why does it have a principal? Why? You've got 30 kids there, 40 kids. It doesn't need a principal. The director of special ed should have, that's where her desk should be. And there's another $120,000. That's where other districts put their director of special ed. They don't have a special principal there.
We have over 60 students, and it's not a principal, it's a director.
And what's the salary?
I don't know.
I'd have to look.
The director and the principal have the same.
But I think this
thing.
gets back to the original comment you made, which is bottom
line
is the target. And I think talking about specific cuts then gets us back into the line.
And I don't want to
portion.
do that.
I understand. So
Okay, thank you.
Appreciate your comment. Thank you. Wrapping this discussion up.
Do we have any votes? Like, am I supposed to come back with less sports teams? Like, I'd like to have-
That has not been,
Okay.
unless the committee
Okay.
directs you to do that. Yes, sir.
I typically don't come up. I'm Joe Gincarelli. I'm the principal at Hope Valley School. I have to disagree with Mr. Cardoza about the whole two principals, going from two principals, one at Ashway, one at Hope Valley, to one. Because, you know what, I had to do that earlier this year for a little bit of time, and every time I was at Ashway, there was an issue at Hope Valley. Every time I was at Hope Valley, there was an issue at Ashway. I had to commute back and forth multiple times. And that's the bottom line. That's going to happen all the time. So having one principal between two schools is just, it's not appropriate. And I just had to come out and say that because, first of all, Hopkinton is geographically, I think, one of the biggest towns in the state. So you have Hope Valley close to Richmond and you have Ashway closer to Westerly. That's 15, 20 minutes every time. So I just wanted to state that just would not work. And I encourage you not to go that route because it's not a good idea at all.
Well, thank you for your professional input. Frank?
Hey, Brian, just a quick question. Last year, you folks, I think, dealt with a 2% balance, right? And you survived. Just confirm that through Sue or Jane.
Yeah.
Last budget cycle,
Yes,
I think
sir.
it was 2%, and
I
no
don't
one...
recall, but why don't we
I'm just-
confirm that for you, right?
Yeah.
I don't have it right now, but we'll confirm.
I agree with Catherine. I often don't, but I think, going down to 2% is probably too much. But maybe 2.4, 2.3, something like that. I realize the position you're in, but any little bit would help us. We're $108,000 over our 4%.
We are, I'm sorry, you are correct. 2% was last year.
Yeah.
It was
So-
confirmed, and I am in favorable of moving in that direction as well.
Anything you can do would be
and
greatly
I intend to hopefully encourage the committee to take it up on the 10th, but right now,
No, I get it.
I'm
I get it.
not, but that's.
I just wanted to make
Yes, sir.
that mention.
Thank you. Okay. Wrapping this up, no further discussion. Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate the input. We are moving on from letter E, and we are going to consent agenda items. Yes, sir. What do you need pulled?
I want to pull 1 and 2.
Perfect. A1 and A2 are pulled. Anything else the committee needs pulled for discussion? No? Yes, sir.
I will make a motion. Before I make my motion, Catherine and I do agree with you most of the time. So with that being said, I would like to make a motion to move the remainder.
Thank you. Motion to move the remainder. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Motion and a second to move the remainder. Those in favor? It is unanimous. Thank you.
Chair?
Yes, sir.
I make a motion to approve A1 executive session minutes of February 11th, 2020, approval of executive session minutes of January 21st, 2020.
Motion and a second for A1. Discussion? No. Those in favor? Thank you. Abstaining? Thank you. We have
Chair,
one-
I'd
one
like to make a
abstention.
motion to approve A2 regular session minutes of February 11th, 2020.
Thank you. Motion and a second for A2. Discussion? No. Those in favor? Thank you. Abstaining? Thank you, sir. This brings us to reports.
Okay, the first is the Say Something update. And so this is a program that we began in November, mid-November, and it's an anonymous tip system essentially, and it's for the campus. So it's students at the middle school and the high school in Cal are instructed on the new tool. Parents were given information about it. And since it began, we've had 76 reports, anonymous reports. So I just wanted to give you an update on that. 7 of them were life safety, which means that when they got the report, the triage center categorized them as life safety, but it doesn't necessarily mean in the end they ended up being life safety. But at least from the way it was reported, that's what it looked like. And it's basically been about 20 reports a month. I really want to thank the Richmond Police because they are the station that takes the call and triages it from the call center, and then they contact the Charlestown Police or the Hopkinton Police depending on where the student lives. So I also obviously want to thank those police officers too because they've been very helpful and supportive and we've all acted on every tip. One of the things, just for information, students are not always going to know that the tip was acted on or how it was acted on, because when they go on and give the tip, there's typically email communication back and forth with the tipster. Sometimes students just put in the tip and leave, and so they don't see that follow-up. Sometimes we don't know their name, we have no information, so we can't get back to them and follow up as to what happened. But we are following up on every tip. And the other thanks that I want to give is to the administrators. So the administrators have put in weekends, Saturday nights. There were 3 calls over the weekend on the long weekend that we had. And you have the calls going to the building administrator, the dean, the SRO, and they're all seeing the calls and reacting along with central office. Myself, Jen Durkin, and Mary Markovitz are on the district team to get those life safety calls. So, I just think it's been a good system. I think it definitely has helped some students. I think we're still working out some kinks with it. But I just wanted to give you an update on how it's going so far. Public budget meeting is March 3rd, so we've been talking about it a lot tonight, but just a reminder, it's at 7:30. It's next Tuesday night in the middle school auditorium. So we won't be coming here, we'll be in the middle school auditorium, and we do need to have 25 registered voters per town to meet the quorum. So please, grab your neighbors, grab your friends, let them know that we really need them there, and we value their voice as we continue this budget process. Kindergarten registration, that is coming up in the month of March. On Tuesday and Wednesday, March 17th and 18th, the schools at each elementary school will have events for kindergarten registration between 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. And also on Artisy, on March 21st, that Saturday, at the middle school between 10 and 1, parents can also register their students. At the schools, when they go to those registrations on the 17th or 18th, they get a tour of the school. They get to speak with the grade K teacher. There are activities. We've really done a lot of work over the last few years to make it more inviting. And also, the students get a gift. And this is for the class of 2033. Wow. And so that you know where these come from, they'll get filled by the school with different types of things for the students. But Community 2000, we want to thank them for the grant that they provide, $387. Chris Phillips, every time we call him each year, he very happily provides us that grant. And we've been able to purchase 250 bags that'll be at each of the schools. And it just helps, again, to make it a more inviting experience for children and for their families. And hopefully they'll also have a nice lunch bag to start the new school year with. Coming events. On February 25th, we have Ashaway School dental screenings. The 25th to the 26th, we have Richmond School snow tubing from 5 to 8 p.m. at Yagoo. On February 27th, the secondary progress reports will be issued. February 27th, the middle school grade 7 and 8 dance will be taking place between 6:30 and 8:30 in the middle school gym. March 1st, we have Hope Valley School PTO URI basketball game from 12 to 3 p.m. March 2nd, there's a spring sports meeting at 7 o'clock in the middle school auditorium. March 3rd to the 6th, Hope Valley has their school book fair. March 3rd, Ashaway School PTO meeting is at 5:30 p.m. in the library. March 3rd at Charlestown, their school PTO meeting is at 6 o'clock in the art room. Luckily, both of those meetings are well before our 7:30, just in case you didn't remember, public budget meeting. So hopefully those parents will be coming right over. And then on March 4th, we have the middle school school improvement team meeting, which is taking place between 3:30 and 5 in the library. March 4th, middle school PTO meeting at 7 o'clock in the library. March 5th, class of 2022. They're having a dine-in fundraiser at Friendly's and Mystic from 5 to 9 p.m. March 5th, Ashaway School PTO, ice cream social and book swap, 5 to 6:30 p.m. March 6th, the High School Interact Club floor hockey for heat fundraiser, and that's 2:30 to 5:30 p.m. in the gym. March 6th to 7th, we have the middle school drama production of Frozen Junior, and that's at 7 p.m. I know I'm looking forward to that in the middle school auditorium. And then March 9th to March 13th, Ashaway PTO Penny Wars. March 9th, Hope Valley School PTO meeting, 6:30 p.m. at the library. March 10th, class of 2021, they're having a cornhole tournament, 2:30 to 4:30 in the high school cafeteria. And March 10th is a Richmond School Improvement Team meeting, 3:45 to 4:30 in room 3.
Thank you, Jane. School committee requests for future agenda items or legal opinions. I don't know who was first, Donna and Craig.
I just wanted to review the policy for the SAF funds.
Policy.
Next meeting or some future meeting.
Policy for SAF funds. Okay. Yes, sir.
How was it?
What? Did I
She read your
steal
mind?
thunder?
But I do have a request.
Okay.
But it's not for future agenda items. Do you think we could tell our administrators in the future that not to schedule a PTO meeting on the same night? Because that's the target audience that we usually get for the future. Other than that, you stole my thunder.
Oh, well, I'm sorry about that.
Bill.
I think they do it on purpose, though. So then they just go over.
Then we're reviewing policy SAF. I think that another bigger issue for me is how the middle school teams function independently of the entire middle school process. I mean, why are some teams with exorbitant, not exorbitant, but very high amounts of money, and other teams, there's this, how are we equalizing the education process for the middle school kids when different teams have money to spend and other teams don't? That's why I need to have maybe the principal or someone come over here and explain the justification for having teams with separate bank accounts, basically.
So
that's a different from the SAF account.
It is. So it's different from the policy review for SAF.
Yes.
So.
And I don't need it right away either. I'm just saying.
Okay, but you're looking for an understanding of.
A justification, not an understanding.
A justification for. Okay.
Middle school SAF funds, teams.
Yep. Could it maybe be a report of what they're spending it on, how they're raising it and how they're spending it? Would that be easier?
Would that be the starting point? I'm just trying to figure out how to move this forward for you, because it's. I think I understand the position.
Yeah, we can look into it.
We can look
Perfect.
into the equity.
Then I think we've got your request.
Yeah.
The equity for SAF funds.
Yeah. At middle school specifically, right?
Specifically at middle school, but we'll use that as a case study.
Yeah.
Additional requests.
Can I just ask a question?
Is it a request for a future agenda item? It's not a discussion topic, is it?
No, question. Never mind, I'll ask it after we adjourn.
Yes, ma'am. That's perfect.
Chair?
Yes, sir.
Seeing there's no more questions, make a motion to adjourn.
Motion second to adjourn. Those in favor? That is unanimous.